The Ohara Incident is one of the most important historical events within the One Piece timeline. Robin's flashback during Enies Lobby showed us an island of scholars being annihilated by the world government for the crime of studying history. The destruction of Ohara was calculated to erase the most dangerous threat to the world government's existence, which is the truth. As the story of One Piece progresses into the final saga, we've learned that Ohara's destruction didn't even accomplish its goal. All of the research and books from Ohara had survived. In this video, I'll be detailing everything that we know about the Ohara incident. We'll cover the island itself, the people who lived there, every key player involved in the destruction of the island, and the actual timeline of events as they unfolded, and the long-reaching consequences of the incident that are still shaping the story of One Piece in the present timeline during the Elbaf arc. So without further delay, here is my video completely detailing the Ohara incident. Ohara was a small island in the West Blue, and on the surface there was nothing particularly remarkable about it. It wasn't a military stronghold or a kingdom with vast resources or a powerful fleet. By all outward appearances, it was a quiet place full of scholars, and this is exactly what made it so terrifying to the world government. At the center of Ohara stood the Tree of Knowledge, a colossal library tree that had been planted 5,000 years ago. The tree functioned as both a library and a research hub, housing centuries worth of historical texts gathered from all across the globe. Archaeologists from every corner of the world were drawn to Ohara because of this tree. It was the single greatest source of human knowledge on the planet, and the scholars who lived there had dedicated their entire lives to studying the past. The world government was fine with people studying history, provided that the history stayed within approved boundaries. The line in the sand was the Void Century, a 100-year gap in the historical record which spans from 900 to 800 years before the current timeline. No historical history exists from that period, and the world government made it a capital offense to investigate why. Anybody caught researching those missing 100 years trying to decipher the poneglyphs which contained information about it was marked for death. The poneglyphs themselves are massive stone blocks scattered across the Grand Line, inscribed with text in an ancient language that almost nobody in the modern world can read. Professor Clover himself had confirmed that they are indestructible, and the fact that whoever created those chose to carve their message into something that cannot be destroyed tells you everything that you need to know about the desperation of the people who made them. They knew their civilizations were going to be wiped out, so they left their story in the only format that their enemies couldn't destroy. The world government's official position was that the poneglyphs contained information about the ancient weapons, and that studying them would lead to those weapons being revived, which would bring about the destruction of the world. So it seems like a clean narrative that painted anyone who studied these stones as a potential threat to global stability. The actual reason, as we now know, is far less noble. The Void Century contains the truth about the world government's own origins, the great kingdom that they destroyed to seize power, and the lies that have sustained their authority for 800 years. People at the top are scared of what's written on the poneglyphs. Without Professor Clover, Ohara's archaeology program would not have existed in the form that it took. Clover grew up alongside his older brother, and as a child he witnessed his brother being killed for a single reason. He was a carrier of the initial D. When confronted by his brother's killers, the young Clover panicked and lied, claiming he was just a friend and had no relation to the dead boy. That shame and cowardice in the face of losing someone he loved became the catalyst for everything that Clover would go on to do. He needed to understand why carrying a name could get somebody killed. He needed to know what the D meant and what history had been buried to keep it hidden. In his younger years, Clover became an explorer and an adventurer, traveling the world to find any scrap of information about the Void Century. The Marines arrested him 10 separate times for his research, but he escaped every single time. His reputation grew to the point where other scholars who admired his work began following him back to Ohara, setting up shop beneath the Tree of Knowledge and joining his efforts. This was how Ohara became the archaeological capital of the world. Clover was also a friend of Vegapunk, Vegapunk. 26 years before the present timeline, he traveled to Punk Hazard specifically to request Vegapunk's help with his research, sharing his full name and the story of his brother's murder. Vegapunk refused, warning Clover about the consequences, but that conversation planted a seed that would bear fruit decades later. Clover also had connections to Monkey D. Dragon, establishing a network of individuals who were each in their own way pushing against the world government's monopoly on truth. What the world government knew and what Clover didn't realize was that they had been watching him for years. They let him continue his research and return to Ohara, letting him attract other scholars to the island, because the world government's strategy was never to stop Clover alone. It was to wait for every like-minded researcher to gather in a single place and then to annihilate them all at once. Nico Olivia was Clover's student and one of the most dedicated archaeologists on the island. After her husband died, she made the decision to continue his unfinished work by embarking on a 6-year expedition to locate and decipher poneglyphs scattered across the seas. She was 27 years old when she left. Her daughter Robin was 2. She placed Robin in the care of her brother Oran and his wife Roji, knowing full well the danger of what she was about to do, but believing that it was the only way to honor the work that her husband had started. For 6 years, Olivia and 33 fellow scholars sailed in secrecy, studying whatever poneglyphs that they could find. They were meticulous about covering their tracks, and for a long time they succeeded, but eventually the Marines caught up with them and their encounter wasn't even close to a fair one. Saul's vessel intercepted their ship, and despite Saul personally ordering his men to take the archaeologists alive, his crew slaughtered all of them except for Olivia. Olivia survived only because her colleagues physically shielded her and fought back long enough for the Marines to take her prisoner instead of killing her outright. The dead scholars were carrying identification that traced them back to Ohara. This is the domino effect that set everything else in motion. The world government now had concrete proof that Oharan scholars were actively deciphering poneglyphs abroad, and not just studying them in the basement of their library. The trap that they had been patiently laying for years, waiting for the right moment to spring, suddenly had its trigger. Olivia herself was captured and brought before Vice Admiral Jaguar D. Saul for interrogation. Now, Saul genuinely struggled with the orders that he was given. After speaking with Olivia and understanding what her research actually meant, he couldn't reconcile the idea of executing her for the crime of studying history. He freed her and helped her escape, which was an act of treason that made him a fugitive from the very military that he'd served his entire career. Olivia rushed back to Ohara to warn her colleagues as she burst into the Tree of Knowledge and begged everyone to flee, telling them that the Marines were coming. Professor Clover refused to leave because the books, research, and the tree itself, these were their life's work. The scholars chose to stay and protect what they had built. Saul's role in the story is quietly one of the most important, and it doesn't get enough credit. The full picture of what Saul gave up deserves its own focus. Back then, he was personally informed by Admiral Sengoku that he'd been selected as one of 5 vice admirals to lead the Buster Call against Ohara. Saul pushed back immediately. He tried to reason with Sengoku that these were researchers interested in history, not criminals building weapons, but Sengoku told him to follow orders. Saul couldn't do it though. After his conversations with Olivia, after seeing her colleagues killed for nothing more than intellectual curiosity, he made a choice that cost him everything. He released Olivia and deserted the Marines. Shortly after, he was shipwrecked in a storm, and by mere coincidence, he washed ashore on Ohara itself, the very island that he was supposed to help destroy. On the beach, Saul met an 8-year-old girl named Nico Robin. She was Olivia's daughter, though neither of them knew this at first. Robin had been living a miserable existence on the island. Her aunt Roji physically and verbally abused her. The other children were terrified of her devil fruit powers and called her a demon. The only people who ever showed her kindness were the scholars at the Tree of Knowledge. Robin's relationship with the scholars started when Clover caught her sneaking into the library trying to steal a book. Instead of throwing her out, he let her stay and read. That single act of warmth from an old professor gave Robin the only real connection that she had to anyone on the island. Clover became her mentor as she studied obsessively, and at just 8 years old, she passed an official archaeology exam and was inducted as a scholar. She told the other archaeologists that she wanted to uncover the true history of the world, just like her mother. Clover forbade her from studying the pornoglyph in the basement, not because he didn't believe in her, but because he knew that the world government would target her if she went down that path. Saul and Robin became friends over the following days as she would steal bread and jam to bring him while he built a raft. Oda knew exactly what he was doing by establishing Saul and Robin's bond here. When Robin eventually mentioned that she was from Ohara, Saul's blood ran cold. He panicked and told her the truth, that the marine warships were already heading for the island. While Saul was building his raft and Robin was running to warn the scholars, CP9 had already made landfall. Spandine, the director of CP9 at the time, led the operation. He was a self-important coward who loved flaunting his authority over people who couldn't fight back, and he'd been handed authority by Admiral Sengoku himself to invoke a buster call if the situation warranted it via a golden dendenmushi. When Olivia heard that CP9 had arrived on shore, she grabbed a rifle and rushed out of the Tree of Knowledge to confront them directly. At that exact moment, Robin was actually running in the opposite direction towards the tree to warn Clover. Mother and daughter had passed within inches of each other without recognizing each other. Neither of them had met in 6 years. Robin was 2 when Olivia left. This is easily one of the cruelest pieces of dramatic irony written by Oda. Olivia confronted Spandine directly, attempting to stall for time by shooting at his coat. She tried to take sole responsibility, insisting that Ohara itself had nothing to do with her actions abroad. Spandine didn't care though. The decision had already been made. He ordered his agents to subdue her, and they used Rokushiki to beat her down. Inside the Tree of Knowledge, CP9 agents ransacked the library while the scholars watched helplessly. They then found the hidden basement. The pornoglyph that the Oharan scholars had been secretly studying sat right there. They now had undeniable physical evidence of forbidden research. Spandine immediately contacted Mary Jo. Professor Clover was granted a direct line to the 5 elders, and he used it. He told them that the pornoglyphs were created by the people of an ancient civilization who knew that they were about to be destroyed, that whoever carved those messages chose indestructible stone specifically because their enemy would try to erase them. He argued that a kingdom had existed during the Void Century, a great kingdom, and that the alliance which destroyed it eventually became the world government of today. The pornoglyphs are not a weapon, they are a testament of a dying civilization's final cry to the future. 3 of the 5 elders, Marcus Mars, Shepherd Jupiter, and Topman Walkyrie, actually recognized Clover on sight. They acknowledged his contributions to universal culture as they expressed regret that he had strayed from the acceptable path. Clover pushed even harder as he stated that the world government didn't fear the ancient weapons being revived. What they actually feared was the identity of the Great Kingdom being public knowledge. Just as Clover was about to say the name of the kingdom, Spandine shot him dead. The 5 elders ordered the Buster Call to be activated immediately after. A Buster Call is the ultimate expression of the world government's military doctrine. It involves 5 vice admirals, 10 battleships, total annihilation of the target with 0 regard for collateral damage. The total strength of a single Buster Call is said to equal that of an entire nation's military. Once the signal is sent from a golden dendenmushi to the silver dendenmushi at Marine headquarters, it cannot be rescinded. The target is marked and the fleet scrambles. Robin later described it as a nightmare version of concentrated arson, and she wasn't exaggerating. Admiral Sengoku had given the golden dendenmushi to Spandine before the operation began, delegating the authority to trigger the call. Spandine pressed the button with a smile on his face, as he genuinely believed that this would earn him a promotion. Among the 5 vice admirals dispatched were Sakazuki, Kuzan, and 3 others whose identities have never been revealed. The fleet arrived and fired an initial salvo to triangulate their coordinates, locking in on their ordnance before unleashing the full bombardment. The first shell struck the Tree of Knowledge, setting it ablaze. As 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge texts gathered from across the entire globe, all of it went up in flames. The scholars didn't run as they stayed inside the burning tree and began throwing every book that they could grab through the windows and into the lake below. They knew that they were going to die, so they accepted it, and they chose to spend their final minutes trying to save as many books as possible. This was so that future generations might one day find them. The lake had gradually started to fill with texts, as Robin and Olivia were finally reunited during the chaos. Olivia initially tried to deny that Robin was her daughter, hoping to protect her from being associated with a wanted criminal, but Robin was already crying, already begging begging to know if her mother had abandoned her. Olivia broke as she held her daughter and told her that she had to live. Right in the middle of this, Robin made a confession that sealed her fate permanently. She told Spandine, to his absolute horror, that she could read pornoglyphs. This was an 8-year-old girl who had taught herself the ancient language by secretly observing the scholars at the Tree of Knowledge. Clover had forbidden her from studying the pornoglyphs directly, wanting to protect her from the world government's wrath, but Robin's natural ability and relentless curiosity had led her to learn it regardless. The moment those words left Robin's mouth, she transformed from a child bystander into a primary target of the Buster Call. Olivia sent Robin away with Saul and went back inside the burning tree to help save books with the others. Olivia didn't choose the books over her daughter here. She chose to ensure that her daughter's suffering and the suffering of every scholar who had died for this research wasn't in vain. If the books burned completely, then Ohara truly was gone. But if even some of them survived, then there was still a chance. Saul carried Robin towards the shore, but the marine ship spotted them and opened fire. He then set Robin down and went ballistic. He grabbed a battleship out of the water and hurled it into another, as he destroyed 5 ships with his bare hands, buying time for Robin to reach the civilian evacuation vessel. But Robin never made it aboard. The other residents of Ohara spotted her and immediately started mocking her, calling her a devil and the daughter of a criminal. When they offered to fetch a rope, Robin tried to help herself by using her Hana Hana no Mi to sprout hands and form a chain to climb aboard, but the civilians recoiled in terror. The same powers that had made children avoid her on the playground now had sealed her fate at the one moment that she needed people to treat her like a human being. Robin had also told them that she was an archaeologist, which only made things worse. Spandine then found her and loudly ordered the ship not to let her on board because she was a target of the Buster Call. Robin ended up walking away crying as she was turned away from the only escape route off of the burning island. Saul charged at Spandine's vessel in a fury, but Vice Admiral Kuzan intercepted him. Kuzan was Saul's friend, and they had served together, and now they were standing on opposite sides of a genocide. Kuzan told Saul that what was happening was for the greater good, that the scholars had broken the law, so what was happening was just the logical outcome. Saul countered that Kuzan knew full well that this wasn't justice. This was the world government making an example of one small island for the rest of the world to see. Kuzan's response was telling. He said that the rules of justice change depending on where you stand. It's no exaggeration to say that that one line has followed Kuzan through the entire story. In the middle of Saul and Kuzan's confrontation, an explosion tore through the harbor. Vice Admiral Sakazuki had ordered his men to fire on the civilian evacuation ship, so all of these citizens of Ohara were killed in a single attack. Sakazuki's reasoning was simple. If even one archaeologist had snuck aboard that ship, then the entire operation would have been for nothing, so he killed everyone as a precaution. The destruction of that evacuation haunted Kuzan, and it's part of the reason why he let Robin go, and I have no doubt that it contributed to him later leaving the Marines altogether. Saul tried to flee with Robin after the evacuation ship was destroyed, but Kuzan made his choice. He used his Hie Hie no Mi to freeze Saul in place. The giant could feel the ice crawling over his body, and he knew that this was the end for him. But instead of screaming and cursing, he laughed. He laughed and smiled, and he told Robin to run, saying that somewhere out there on the ocean there were people waiting for her, people who would become her friends, and who would always protect her. Saul's laugh is the backbone of Robin's survival. For 20 years, through betrayal after betrayal, Robin carried that laugh with her. It was the last thing anyone had given her with pure kindness, and she held onto it like a lifeline. Robin ran through the forest, dodging marine gunfire, and she emerged on the other side of the island where Kuzan was waiting. He told her plainly that he was letting her go. He was curious about why Saul risked his life for her, and he wanted to see what she would become. But he gave her a warning. He was not her friend, and if she ever became a threat, he would be the first one to come for her. He then created an ice path across the sea and pointed her towards the next island. Robin took a small boat and sailed away from everything that she had ever known. Behind her, Ohara was consumed by flames. The Tree of Knowledge had collapsed, crushing the scholars who had stayed inside it. Clover, Olivia, all of the others ended up dying in the tree, surrounded by the books that they had spent their lives protecting. Olivia's final thought was one of regret. She never got to say a proper farewell to her daughter. Robin tried to laugh the way that Saul had told her to, but she couldn't, as she just cried. Kuzan's actions that day defined his entire trajectory going forward. He froze his own friend. He watched Sakazuki murder an entire shipload of civilians, civilians. He let an 8-year-old girl escape into a world that would hunt her for 2 decades. Years later, Robin had joined the Straw Hats and the crew survived Eni's lobby. Kuzan found her at Water 7. He told her the truth, that he had only let her go because Saul had been his friend, and that he'd wanted to see whether if Saul's faith in her was justified. But watching her wander the seas as a fugitive had made him question that decision. He called her a ticking time bomb, and then he asked directly whether if she had finally found a home with the Straw Hats. When she said yes, something shifted. Kuzan told her to live strong and said that Ohara was not fully destroyed yet. The memory and the purpose and the will of those scholars still lived on inside of her. Following the Buster Call, Spandine reported back to Sengoku that one of the scholars had escaped the bombardment. He tried to pursue Robin, but his ship was caught on Kuzan's eyes, a detail that confirms Kuzan deliberately obstructed the pursuit. Spandine, furious that his clean operation had a loose end, recommended putting a bounty on Robin's head. He personally fabricated the narrative that Robin had sunk 5 marine battleships and destroyed the evacuation ship carrying Ohara's civilians, framing the destruction that Saul and Sakazuki had respectively caused as the work of a child. Sengoku approved the bounty of 79 million berries. An 8-year-old girl became one of the most wanted individuals in the world. The broader propaganda campaign was equally ruthless. The world government branded the scholars as the demons of Ohara. They claimed that they had been pursuing forbidden knowledge with the intent to resurrect the ancient weapons and destroy the world. The actual reason for the Buster Call, that the scholars had uncovered evidence of the Great Kingdom and the truth behind the world government's formation, was buried completely. The public ate all of this up. Even people who are naturally suspicious of the world government bought into this narrative. Iceberg, one of the sharpest minds in Water 7, believed for years that the scholars of Ohara were dangerous criminals who had been rightfully stopped. It wasn't until his conversation with Robin years later that he understood the truth. That's how effective the government's propaganda was. Spandine leveraged his role within the Ohara incident to climb the political ladder. His son Spandam first inherited his old position as chief of CP9, and it was Spandam's bumbling that accidentally triggered the second Buster Call at Eni's lobby. Spandine eventually accumulated enough influence to get Spandam promoted further to the chief of CP0, the strongest Cypherpole division. When Spandine fell sick and became bedridden, his influence withered and Spandam lost the position, but the damage had already been done. 2 generations of that family inflicted suffering on Robin, and neither of them had the combat ability to beat a paper bag in a fight. Ohara was erased from every map in the world, and the island where Robin grew up simply ceased to exist on paper. Robin spent 20 years running. Every single group she joined eventually betrayed her. The very first was an old farm woman who took her in, put her to work, and seemed kind enough that Robin let her guard down. Then one night, the woman had visitors as world government agents appeared. The old woman was seen screaming at them to hand over the reward money, yanking at their clothes. She had never viewed Robin as a person, just a payday waiting to be collected. A couple took her in next as Robin worked hard for them, as she was grateful for any scrap of normalcy. She overheard them one evening discussing plans to turn her in, as she fled before they could, and they had the audacity to call her an ungrateful girl who had betrayed their kindness. She joined her first pirate crew at 8 years old. When the government caught up to them, the crew assumed Robin had sold them out as they threw her away and cursed her name. This kept happening over and over again to her for 2 decades. Different faces, but same outcomes. Robin learned to trust nobody and to keep moving, to treat every relationship as temporary, because her past had continuously proved this to be true. At one point during those years, she contemplated throwing herself off of a cliff. She stood at the edge and thought about ending it, but she didn't go through with it because she remembered what Saul had told her on the beach, and what Olivia had told her in the burning tree, to live. Those words spoken by people she'd known for hours. They carried her through 20 years of isolation. The world government forced Robin to survive by scrounging through garbage for food. Robin later learnt that Ohara had been removed from every published map and atlas in the world. When she discovered a copy without her island, she took a pen and drew it back in herself. The locals who caught her doing this chased her out of town while screaming obscenities. Eventually, Robin stopped laughing entirely. Saul's signature laugh, the derashishi that she had adopted, went silent. She used it one final time while sitting in the rain with a stray dog begging for food that she didn't have, and after that she let the laugh go. There were a few mistakes following the Ohara incident. The first was assuming Jaguar D. Saul was dead. Remember, Kuzan froze him solid and the Marines left him there on Ohara as it was burning, but when Saul regained consciousness, he found himself himself drowning in the ocean. The fire consumed the island and it had melted the ice encasing him, so the water swept him out to sea. Saul survived, but barely, as he was badly injured. The world government operated under the assumption that Saul had died helping Robin escape at the moment of his freezing. They never confirmed the kill. Once Saul had learned that Robin survived the Buster Call as well, he set about doing something extraordinary. He gathered a group of giants from Elbaf, including Goldberg, Gerd, and Hajruddin, and he returned to Ohara. The scholars had thrown their books into the lake during the bombardment, and those books were still there, waterlogged but intact. The Marines had searched the island for survivors after the Buster Call. They found the books in the lake and assumed that it was coincidence. They didn't bother retrieving the books. Saul and the giants did, as they transported every salvageable text from Ohara's lake to Elbaf, where they were housed in the Owl Library. Bragman, a famous book of Grand Line Explorer journals, was among the texts saved from the Tree of Knowledge. It's been suggested that the archaeologists' efforts to save it during the Buster Call are the reason that it eventually was mass-produced and made available to the wider public. This is a small detail, but it captures the true scope of what those Ohara scholars accomplished in their final moments. They saved everything that they could get their hands on, their own research and everyone else's. Meanwhile, two other individuals visited the ruins of Ohara independently. This was Monkey D. Dragon, who arrived to pay his respects to Clover, and standing in front of the charred remains of the Tree of Knowledge, he vowed to create an army capable of opposing the world government. The revolutionary army was born, at least in concept, on the ashes of Ohara. Dragon had seen what happened when a group of intellectuals tried to uncover the truth through scholarship alone. He understood that the next attempt would need military power behind it. The next person to visit Ohara was Vegapunk, and he came shortly after the incident. He was mourning his old friend Clover. He and Dragon established a memorial in front of the charred remains of the Tree of Knowledge to honor the archaeologists who died there. When he later discovered that the books had been transported to Elbaf, he secretly sent a clone of himself there roughly 2 years after the incident. This clone met with Saul and read through everything that the scholars had preserved. This set Vegapunk on his own path of researching the Void Century, a path that would eventually lead to the Egghead incident, his own assassination by the world government, and the worldwide broadcast that finally delivered Ohara's findings to the public. The parallels between Ohara and Egghead are deliberate and unmistakable. Both were targeted by Buster Calls specifically because someone was researching the Void Century. Both had Nico Robin present, and both had the 5 elders directly involved. Vegapunk spent years absorbing the knowledge that Clover and the other Oharan scholars had painstakingly gathered. When the world government discovered that their own chief scientist had been continuing the forbidden research, they ordered his assassination. Saturn himself accompanied the Buster Call fleet to Egghead as insurance, and in a moment of savage irony, the organization that had killed Clover to prevent the truth from being spoken watched helplessly as Vegapunk's pre-recorded broadcast transmitted the exact truth to the entire planet. The 5 elders specifically noted that Vegapunk intended to finish what Clover started. They recognized the threat for what it was, the same research carried forward by a different man. And this knowledge was now reaching the audience that Ohara never got the chance to address. Clover was shot mid-sentence 22 years ago. Vegapunk told the world what actually happened on Ohara. The information chain that began with Clover's expeditions, passed through Olivia's sacrifice, survived in the lake at Ohara, and retrieved by Saul, read by Vegapunk, and finally delivered to billions of people, and this is one of the most incredible narrative through lines that Oda has ever constructed. During the current Elbaf arc, we see Robin reuniting with Saul, and it brings the story full circle in one of the most emotionally devastating ways possible. Saul spent the years after Ohara rebuilding himself on Elbaf. He affiliated himself with the giant nation, and at the request of King Harold established the Walrus School as a part of Harold's broader peaceful reforms. The former Marine Vice Admiral became a history teacher. The books from Ohara's lake were transported to Elbaf's Owl Library, where they were overseen by a librarian owl named Biblo. Biblo possessed an ability that caused any book brought into its vicinity to grow in size, a power linked to the Iku Ikunomi. The library became a repository for Ohara's research and far beyond it, housing the broader preservation of knowledge that the world government had tried to destroy. When the Straw Straw Hats arrived on Elbaf and Robin came face to face with Saul, the giant didn't even know how to greet her after all of those years. So he faked collapsing on the ground to try and surprise her with a joke. Of course, it didn't work on the adult Robin, but she told him his laugh was still funny, and when he picked her up and told her she looked just like Olivia, she was deeply moved. He then introduced her to the Owl Library, revealing that many of the books it contained were the ones saved from Ohara. Robin was looking at the physical proof that her mother's final act had meant something. Saul asked Robin if she'd heard Vegapunk's broadcast. He called it Ohara's legacy and praised Vegapunk for risking his life to ensure the scholar's work reached the world. He voiced his anger over the lies that had been spread about her for 20 years, but Robin stopped him. She didn't want to talk about that, she just wanted him to praise her for still being alive. Saul broke down and hugged her, thanking her for surviving. Robin, unable to hold back, confessed how much she had missed him. She introduced Saul to Luffy and the rest of the crew, and Saul and Luffy thanked one another for looking after Robin, which caused everyone present to break into tears all over again. And then came the gut punch from the God Knight's invasion. When Shepard Summers encountered Saul on Elbaf, he instantly recognized him as a former Vice Admiral and knew about his survival from the Ohara Incident. Summers reprimanded the Marines' buster call for being sloppy, openly criticizing them for failing to confirm all casualties. For over 2 decades, the world government had believed Robin was the sole survivor. Summers shattered that assumption in a single glance. The God Knight's presence on Elbaf puts the books from the Owl Library directly in danger once again. Ohara's legacy is being threatened for a second time, and the Straw Hats are standing directly between it and destruction. So yeah, this pretty much sums up the entire Ohara incident. We've reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What are your thoughts about everything we've discussed within this video? Which character in this entire chain of events resonates with you the most? Do you think the Owl Library on Elbaf is going to survive the God Knight's invasion, or are we about to watch Ohara's legacy get threatened all over again? Continue the discussion in the comments, and lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this one, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.